you, Elmina. And I wonder if we could put those in the chat, just so that I can. I took some notes myself, and I was thinking about all of that this morning too. I want to thank Elmina for inviting me to be here, and I feel very honored to participate in this panel. My name is Kamara Mary Rajabari. I am an arts-based, ancestral, intuitive psychotherapist practicing in Oakland, California. I have a private practice here. I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist professionally. But I really identify more as being a spiritualist, and I integrate that work into the psychotherapy work that I do. I also bring in ancestral work, depending on who I'm working with. It's real client-centered, but my practice is specializing in anxiety, depression, intergenerational trauma experienced by Black, Indigenous, and people of color, so BIPOC community. I want to set the context a little bit for how I will answer these questions, because I feel like often, sometimes we do not know a little bit about people's history, and so that you'll know a little bit about the context that I'm speaking from. So I was born, I'm Gen X, I was born in 1969. And I think that's important to mention, to parents who were from the Southern United States. So my father's family is from Mobile, Alabama, and my mother's family is from Jackson, Mississippi. I lived, my parents were part of the Great Migration that happened, where a lot of Black folks moved out of the South. Many headed north, or maybe to the Midwest, but my family headed to the West Coast. So that's a little bit of the context. My parents grew up during civil rights, and my paternal side also has multicultural heritage. So my great-great-grandfather, and a lot of people will say great, but I wanted to explain that 1969 to let you all know that I'm only 3 generations removed from slavery. My great-great-grandfather was enslaved until he was like a teenager. And his heritage was that his mother was full-blooded Muskogee. In the South, they say Creek Indian. And he was half African American as well. So there's that heritage, although, and my family is very big on genealogy. So we found records of him on the Dawes rolls as being listed as 2 years old. And there's also an infant. So we're thinking he had a sibling and his mother. So I mention that too, because I think in terms of indigeneity, we lost contact with that part of our family because of the Trail of Tears. Basically, long story short, when that happened, either people were put on the Trail of Tears or they integrated into different communities that were there in hiding. And so it became known that most people wouldn't identify as being Indigenous during that time, and Native American. They would just take on the identity of being Black, which is what you will probably see throughout many of our histories that have roots in the Southern United States. We may be mixed with a lot of different cultures, but my family, at least, we identified as Black. And we are Black. And so going to the Blackness, for me, it is an ancient, sacred, immortal sense of being immortal, because we believe in the cycles of life. But it's also like rooted in connectedness, resistance, survival. I think of Blackness as creativity. I think of Blackness as love. And I think of Blackness too as all parts of life. Like when we close our eyes, we are Black. There is Blackness. When we look into the night sky, there is Blackness. There is Blackness in plants. There's Blackness in the food that we eat. There's Blackness in our life growing up in the womb. And there's Blackness in our death. And all of that is a cycle to me. And this Blackness also can drill down to my experiences, my personal experiences growing up in the culture, African American culture of the Southern United States. It's the Black church, it's jazz, it's salmon croquettes and grits, it's cornbread and gumbo, it's rap music, it's spoken word, it's like double Dutch, it's eyes on the prize, it's also mystery. And most of all, it's also change. We are change makers. And that's kind of like what I get from that. When I think of indigeneity, I think of a group of people, my ancestors, brought over who were indigenous to another continent, brought over to be indigenous to this land. And while there were people already here, we worked that land, we built up that land, we fed the people of this land. And so I feel like my ancestors also became, whether we wanted to or not, indigenous to this land as well. So that's how I think of indigeneity. It's about the relationship to the land, relationship to the earth, being the keepers of the earth, being the keepers of this cosmology that is the circle that's bringing us all together, that's continuous. So when I think of, let me go to the next kind of question here. What prompted my spiritual journey? Well, it's kind of, Elmina, I thought about this question because I was like, wow, the older you get, there's so many experiences that pull at me. I would say that my spiritual journey has been in a lot of different phases. Oh, and by the way, Almina, can you let me know when I'm kind of like got 3 minutes left or something?
Yes, so I'm watching the time. I got you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because I'm long-winded. That's the older folks. You start getting older, you start having all kinds of stories. But I'll say that I was born into like a spiritual family. There is, and I can't like 100% verify this because Black folks, we in the United States, we have a lot of like stories. My family has a lot of stories. So on my mother's side, it was said that, and this is very specific, so I don't know if people have heard of this church, Holiness. So my mother's side, I had ancestors that started the Holiness Church. And then I also was raised in the Southern Baptist Church, African AME Church. So there's like those three kind of pinnacles of spiritual practice that I was born into. Going to Sunday school. My grandparents on my paternal side lived across, our church was built by slaves, enslaved people. It's a historic church in Mobile, Alabama. And so our connection to that church, it's where all of our family on the paternal side is, we have all of our life cycle, such as birth, christenings, baptisms, funerals through that church. I don't know if I will, since I haven't lived down there, but it's a very much where our family is still rooted and connected to Mobile, Alabama. And so, just to kind of get back on track with that, my spiritual journey went through that church, but I would say the early Black church. I feel like the Black church that's now is a little bit different, but when I was young, I went to live with my grandparents for a little bit while my parents were going through their own thing. My sister and I lived with my grandparents, and it gave me insight to one, an older generation. I was, my grandparents were born in the 20s, so it was an opportunity to learn from them and be parented by them. And so, I had all these church experiences that I wouldn't have had if I stayed in California with my parents. I just kind of know that, like, they didn't carry the same spiritual practices out west with them. I mean, occasionally they would go to church, but they really didn't hang on to a lot of those practices. So by my sister and I living with them, we were exposed to, I was just thinking about Easter Sunday poems that you had to memorize as a child. Every child got a poem right before Easter Sunday, like a week or two. And can people put in the chat if that was a tradition that you grew up with or heard about? But you were given a poem as a child. It didn't matter how old you were. It didn't matter how old you were. So around that time, I might have been about 8 or 7, and my sister might have been like 6 or 5. You were expected to memorize that poem and get up in the before the congregation on Easter Sunday and say that poem without a piece of paper. You're supposed to recite it. And I felt like that was my first creative, I don't want to say creative performance, because, we had to memorize that. And that was the first time I've ever been asked to do anything like that. And my grandparents were like, yeah, and every time I saw an adult, right before Sunday, they'd be like, say your speech, so I remember that pressure of having to memorize that speech and also, sing a song. And I felt like those things are rooted inside of me. And it gave me a sense of this community that I'm not so sure many people in younger generations have access to anymore. Maybe it's still in the South that I'm seeing. Yeah, somebody said that they had to do that in church. Yeah. So going fast forwarding to that, moving back with my parents, back to California, not really having much more of those experiences with my grandparents, but it's been embedded. It would be much later in life when I was an undergrad and starting to study Black studies and the ways of African-centered cosmology, like studying those things, I became more curious about the ways in which, my early ancestors worshiped. And so that led more into my own curiosity. And, through that, I've participated in different ancestral circles. I think one of the most maybe powerful, poignant parts of this journey has been in a nature quest. Some people might call it a vision quest, although I don't want to use the name that way. But a group of women, including myself, we were guided with a teacher and we went out separately into nature. So I was in nature by myself for about 5 days, fasting with spirit. And, I had a partner so that we could check in to see if each other was safe. We would climb the top of a hill and wave to each other like, I'm safe. But for the most part, we were out in nature with ourselves. And that began this practice of like inner work, being in nature, communing with myself, starting to hear the voice of spirit, developing my hearing, because I believe that spirit speaks to us constantly, but we have to develop the hearing for that. And that particular experience helped me to develop that listening ear. I'm going to move forward a little bit because I know I only have a few minutes, and people can ask me questions later. But I would think, when I think about just how do I honor my ancestors, I want to say that towards my spiritual development, I made like a little altar, and it wasn't any guidance from anyone. I just decided one day, my people, it seems like they make altars. So it kind of, for me, it was always very much like listening. Like if you put a glass of water here, and you come and talk to us like spirit, then that is the beginning of the practice. And then when I moved to Georgia for maybe a couple of years as an adult, I started to be connected with people who practice traditional African religion, Yoruba, Akan, Voodoo. And I started to learn from them, and it helped me to strengthen my practice. And even though I would go and get divinations and see, is this the practice of my people? People would always tell me, no, you're already initiated. And so I would always feel like, I can't seem to connect with what was happening here in my current environment. And but I used those practices to build up my own shrine. And I felt like after a while I was being guided by my ancestors to build a shrine. And I built my own shrine. I go to it every day. I pray, I meditate with my ancestors every day. I hear their voice is loud and clear. And the more and the deeper I get into the work, I hear more of my ancestors from different cultures. They're not as strong as my African ancestors, but sometimes they'll come through, and that is my Native American, as well as I've heard from white ancestors. Now, I'm not working with them, but I've heard from them too. What I would say is that what I've learned from ancestral work is that it's careful work. It's sacred work, and you have to know the voice of your ancestors, and versus your own voice, versus the voice of maybe other spiritual energies. So I don't want to make it sound like it's a simple thing, but I felt like the calling that I had was to build my own practice, because my people, the energies I was working with were so ancient that they were like, it's not exactly what you have exposure to right now. It's something very specific to the ancestors I was working with. So I don't know if that's clear, but I wanted to mention that. Here's what I'll say in terms of what I think it's critical for Black people to understand. And I find, and this is coming out of some of the work I do, my own experiences, is that everything about Blackness, who we are, it's really, our power is in our gaze. Our power is in what we pay attention to. The world pays attention to what we pay attention to. The world loves to be in connection with what we think is wonderful, beautiful, powerful. And this is why we're on pancake boxes. This is why people follow our gaze. And for a long time, this gaze, I think what we're realizing now is this gaze has been manipulated. This gaze, we've been told to look at the things that bring white supremacy power. And this great turning, this great change for us is about returning our gaze to what's important: our love, our care, our health, our mental health, our communities, our families. So we return our gaze. As we return our gaze, we become much more clear. And that gaze is what will provide us with a liberation from this spiritual war that we're in. Because I agree with Elmina, we're in a spiritual war. And when you don't know yourself, you can be used by all kinds of energies. You can be used by the system. So a lot of the work is understanding the spiritual war so that the divisions don't happen, because you understand how this is all taking place. And one last thing I think I'll mention, because I'm probably at time, what I'm seeing in my practice.
You got 5 minutes. You got
okay,
5
good.
minutes. I added an extra 5 minutes since we started a little late. You got 5 minutes.
Okay, great. What I'll say, what I notice in my practice, and what I notice even from my own personal experience, especially around our own health, our own healing, is that a lot of the trauma is sexual. It's sexual trauma. And the trauma of our ancestors who experienced enslavement throughout the diaspora, and our indigenous ancestors who have been removed, it's all sexual trauma. Sexual trauma, to me, what I'm getting from my guides and my ancestors, is the way that they use the spiritual weapon. And so that sexual trauma is the way that when children, young children, even adults are traumatized sexually, you carry that wound in such a way that other energies can ride you if you're not careful. And so it is important to heal that inner child, that wounded part of yourself, and heal it in a way where you understand what's happening in this world. It's all a spiritual war. It's all manufactured to keep us as servants to white supremacy, to keep our gaze and our emotional state responding to white supremacy. So when we take that back, when we begin to understand that we have the power. We've always had the power. We have always had the power to move forward. We are the change. As Octavia Butler said, God is change. Everything we touch is change. We even touch God. We change God. It's like we have to understand that is a teaching that is so powerful. And we have that power as Black people. Let me see. I felt like I was all over the place. I hope people are following me. But lessons I've learned really quickly. Boundaries, gotta have them. You've got to teach people how to treat you. You've got to teach people how to treat you, down to your family, down to friends, down to employers. And with that comes self-acceptance and self-awareness. And know that pain and suffering are just teachers. They're just teachers. But learn from the pain, learn from the suffering, learn from your grief. Black people have a lot of grief. And I would say, as Malidoma Somé had said, as well as Sabantu Somé said, a lot of our work has to do with grief. It's grief work. And once we do that grief work and come into our healing, you're able to hear spirit. You're able to feel your connection with this earth and with the Divine Mother. So it's all part of a beautiful cycle. But this white supremacy wants you to think that you just are born and you die. No, you are immortal. And our ancestry is immortal. It is part of who we are. We keep living. And that's what we need to understand about our indigenous practices of our people. There are protocols, there are ceremonies, there's rituals. All of that is to keep us aware of this cycle that we're in, and that there isn't an end. What our ancient Kemetic had this saying, regard today as tomorrow and yesterday as today. Like, meaning there's no decision that you're making that's not going to influence your future. And there's no decision that you are responding to that was the result of the past. It's Sankofa. It's all of these things, regardless of the culture, regardless of the specific religion it's coming out of, it's teaching us.
Still here. It's still here.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for mentioning that grief. We're going to transition to Tay now, but something I do want to mention briefly is grief really is a gateway, because for me, with my spiritual journey, I was raised in a Black American church. My parents are continental Africans. I was always in the church. But in terms of shifting to ancestral work, it was the grief of doing research about my family history and colonization and feeling like we lost so much, right? And then that was like the gateway for me to realize, no, we actually didn't. we did lose it, but you can always access it again if we tap into our spiritual means and things of that nature. So thank you for sharing that. We're gonna move on to Tay Amari Little now. I just really want to thank Tay for being here, and I want to say something that I think is really important. I have not seen spiritual workers and speak to the sacred militancy in the way that Tay has. I haven't seen anyone else do it the way they have. The directness and the teaching about it. They have teachings, they have worksheets, and we will send out all the speakers' information. We put it on the Eventbrite, and we'll also send it to you all so you can have their websites and everything again. I really think that work is so needed, and that we have to understand that warfare is not just about guns and weapons. It is intellectual, it is spiritual, it is all these things. And I really admire Tay and Mari Little's work on that. So without further ado, you can go ahead, Tay, and share from your heart, share from the questions, wherever you feel moved to speak from.
Okay, thank you so much. Also, you said some really kind words. Thank you as well. I'm glad that y'all be benefiting, because me and my spirits love talking about war. And so I love that y'all find lessons and, just resonate so much, because that's what we try to do. And so my name is Taylor Amari Little, but if we're speaking on a first name basis, then you can call me Tay. I use she, her, and he, him pronouns. And I am the daughter of Sharisa Greenwood. My people are African-American by way of Detroit, Wadesboro, North Carolina, Lynette, Alabama, and other locations throughout the South. And our people are primarily Soninke, Akan, Fulbe, also known as the Fulani people, Wolof, and Oromo from the Hararghe region. Yes, hey, North Carolina, yes, indeed. What does Blackness mean to you, and what does indigeneity mean to you? I wanted to start off with that one, since that was like the first question in the chat. I wanted to start off by giving context to not context, but just like the way that I work with it, and my background, and even in my business, how we refer to it, what we mean when I talk about Blackness. So we see Blackness as a life force, and a spirit of its own. We consider it the glue, like the glue between the worlds, the glue between the realms, the glue between everything. It's like these protecting bonds. It's also life. It's also healthy cycles. It's also existence. And so whenever we're talking about war, like we're also meaning that we sit in the middle of a deep war between Blackness, which is that glue, the protecting bonds, life, etc., healthy cycles, and also anti-Blackness. That's the other side of the war, where it's nothingness, anti-existence, or in other words, eradication or obliteration. Both of those things have spiritual implications and representations. And so when we're talking about war, like those are the two sides that we're referring to. Of course, we always want to be committed to Blackness. We always want to be embodying Blackness, channeling that in allegiance to Blackness, because that's going to be the safest thing for everybody involved. In terms of beings, in terms of being a being, in this realm, stuff like that. Of course, when we think about Blackness, we're talking about skin, and we're talking about phenotype, we're talking about how we look like, but the way that, and that's good. And to add to that, though, how we conceptualize Blackness, and how I was taught to conceptualize Blackness, it includes not only phenotype, but also phenotype and spirit. You got to have both. You can't just rearrange the way that you look and then suddenly you Black in 2019. It don't work like that. I'm not saying we're in 2019, but I'm saying some people be starting a little late. But yeah, it's not like that. It's also a spirit. Like, what is at the core? What is at the core of your spirit? What I'm saying? Is it Blackness or is it not? And that's separate from, we see that separate as having just a few Black ancestors. You have to be, Blackness is something that claims us. We are children of Blackness as well. And so in terms of beings, it includes, again, having a Black spirit, and in a sense, it mandates being covered by Black spirits too, like wrapped in the essence of surrounding Black spirits, whether that means Black ancestors, and also oftentimes it's not just, ancestors who are around us, it's all types of spirits who who are in this world, in these worlds, and also who advocate on our behalf. So we're thinking about those Black spirits as well, especially like non-human ones. My spirits kind of talk about it like a sandwich almost, like Blackness, being Black is like Black on Black on Black, like for full Black people anyway, like Blackness is something that you're both embodying and you're surrounded with at the same time, like a coating, a spiritual coating on the outside from the spirits who you're in alignment with. And when it comes to this, kind of is starting to overlap with the indigeneity topic as well, but it is possible to lose like some of our ties to it, like to like our, this idea of like having a core Black spirit. We start to lose some of our ties to it when we are just like fully surrounded by like white spirits and other non-Black spirits who just out here, picking at you, picking off your soul. Like, and what the previous speaker just said in terms of like, when you don't know like who you are, or when you're vulnerable in such a state, it's so easy for energies to ride off of you. That was the quote. Like, that is extremely true. And when you are in a vulnerable position like that, it does become very vulnerable for you for anti-Black spirits to ride you. And we do talk about that, like in we have a few different like workshops. A part of my business called Avoiding Academia is one of the workshops, and also Spirit Work is Your Work is another one where we kind of talk about that a little bit as well. But so anyway, so Blackness is phenotype and spirit, and Blackness is also what I think of as highest authority, and as needing the highest respect. And it's important to understand that, like, when I talk about Blackness, I'm really talking about not just like what we think in terms of like human, being like Black humanhood, essentially, if you want to call it that, for lack of better words. But we're talking about beyond that as well. So Blackness as like highest authority and deserving the highest respect. So there's a piece, I want to give a small example of this actually. There's a piece that I have on Patreon from a couple weeks ago, and it's called The High Respect of Ebonics / AAE, African American English. And I love this example because for me, what my spirits have trained me over time is that Blackness is the highest thing. Like, it's like one of the highest things that matter. You know what I'm saying? Like, so anything that's Black, you got to put that first, as opposed to like non-Blackness. Like, there's a specific order and there's a specific strategy that we approach like our various things, like our bodies, what we produce, our life force. There's a really specific way that we're supposed to orient ourselves. So that way, at the end of the day, anything that we do, our actions are benefiting Blackness as a spirit, Blackness, all of us as children of it at the end of the day. That's the orientation that we're supposed to have. So a little snippet of what that can look like is, there's an elder of mine who is an Oromo elder. If you don't know about the Oromo ethnicity, those are people from Oromia, which is in present-day Ethiopia. They were colonized, / still are being colonized. It's a very violent experience. And there's an Oromo elder that I have, and he's a teacher of mine as well. And we talk about like once or twice a week at least, over the phone, over video call, over text. We just interact all the time. We speak Afan Oromo when we can, but obviously there are going to be times, because I'm not fluent in Afan Oromo, there's going to be times where we have to speak in English because that's a middle language. It's a language that is going to let us meet each other halfway. But the thing is that if we have to speak English, and it has to be English with a Black essence. So for him, that may be, like his Oromo accented English. For me, that's Ebonics. So like us speaking in these like Black languages or these Black tongues allows us to have the highest respect towards one another. Like if we're not able to speak the Black language, like this Black language that, that connects he and I, which was Afan Oromo, because I'm not fluent, then the next thing we go to is Black tongues beneath that. The next closest Black tongues we can do. That's what I'm trying to say. And so that doing that, performing that allows us to still have the highest respect towards one another, because the ethics behind that is, and this is kind of referencing a quote from the piece as well on Patreon, the ethics is that this person, Barcisa, that's what we call him because it just means teacher and that's normal. Barcisa, like, he is not my enemy and he is not adjacent to my enemy. If I say I care for you, then there's no reason why I should be speaking standard American English to you. If I'm speaking standard American English instead of Ebonics or something, then you should be concerned. You should be like, what's wrong with her? What's going on? Is she okay? You know what I'm saying? You know, it's necessary for us to communicate, and if it's necessary for us to speak in English anyway, you know, it should be in a Black tongue. Once again, purely out of respect. And you know, if of course there can be levels to it, like, you know, am I safe with this person? Even if this person is Black, am I sensing something, you know, that needs to be worked through? Do I feel like I can show up as myself today? Like things like that. You know, there's levels that can like change the context a little bit. But for this case, you know, this context, you know, if this is for me to show up in a space with someone who I claim to care for, who is also Black, you know, whether they're of any Black ethnicity, and then for me to do that and place standard American English at the front of my tongue, unsolicited, and when I'm not in danger, you know, that is an action that for me, like, that means that I'm lacking respect, and that means I'm lacking reflection, and that means that I have to start questioning, because that could be a course of unalignment. Again, if there's nothing else that's like, you know, adding, like, contributing to that context, you know, because oftentimes we code switch when we're not feeling safe. Like, that's where that comes from. When we're not feeling safe, something is at risk. But if that's not the case, then I should be speaking in a Black tongue purely out of respect. So then I want to touch on indigeneity as well. So for me, how I, you know, conceptualize that, very similar to, you know, what was coming up before in terms of being home, you know what I'm saying? Like belonging to a home, and then that following us no matter where we go. It's an essence, again, of like being claimed and also having claim. You know, it's with indigeneity, all Black people are indigenous, and, you know, thank God more people are starting to acknowledge that, like, and put that in our conversations and stuff like that, a lot more. But, you know, it needs to be talked about a lot more, because because, you know, just because we were displaced and, you know, forced onto this land doesn't mean that, you know, everything just absolutely left us. You know what I'm saying? Like, things just have to be pulled out of us in a certain way, you know, but these things still show up, like these different pieces of our culture still show up all the time, like our continental culture still show up all the time, like in what we have today. And it should be honored as such. You know what I'm saying? Like, we did create something new, but at the same time, how new is it? You know, it's like more like reiterations of what we just were doing just a couple years ago, just a couple decades ago, or centuries ago, etc. And so we're always belonging to a home. We're always belonging to a home. That thing is always showing up inside of us. You can look at an African American person, say, an example is like, if I look at, you know, a Black American person, say they in Florida, sometimes it's just really easy to be like, oh my God, they are such a Congo baby, such a Congo baby. You know what I'm saying? It shows up. And so, you know, sometimes it's just that essence of being claimed and also having claim, because we are carrying these things in our blood and our spirit as well. And there's these mechanisms that we do that helps us to be able to continuously renew that inside of us as well. Even like, especially when we are physically away from the land that helped us birth our cultures for a long time. And if those mechanisms are lost, you know, then it does become possible to like not have that or as much as that anymore, and lose access to that indigeneity, like, for lack of better words at the moment. Some of those mechanisms that I'm referring to, like really simple ones, things that we think of as simple, is even like food. You know what I'm saying? Like food of our traditional Black ancestors. There's so much spirit, so much soul in food. So it's gonna give us, when we eat our traditional foods, it's always going to give us soul back when we're in a low place, you know, when we ain't got that much soul, when we got enough, we just could always have more, you know, it's gonna give back to us. That is Black essence in our food, and we are always gonna need that. Also, language is a mechanism. These are examples that we, sometimes some people, take them for granted, but they're mechanisms that help us continue our indigeneity and renew them in a sense, so that we don't lose ourselves, and that we especially don't lose ourselves into whiteness or anti-Blackness. And so I want to keep an eye on time as well. And so, yeah, so all Black people are indigenous. And, we do talk about this as well. And again, like some of the workshops. So some of y'all, I know, I see some of y'all are from those workshops. You might hear this again. But in terms of initiations into whiteness and pledging to whiteness, like we have conversations about that as well. Because all Black people are indigenous, but there is the state of things, and the state of this war includes that there are some people like of our communities who are unfortunately getting pulled away. And instead of pledging allegiance to our lands and our spirits, are being pushed to pledge allegiance to whiteness, white beings, and spirits, and white institutions, other forms of anti-Blackness. And so we see those, as a result of that, we see those connections fade and their souls experience like irreparable damage. And so we call those initiations into whiteness. When you start to experience those initiations is when that can impact, your connection to, or it does impact your connection to yourself, to your indigeneity, to your Blackness, all in one. So let's see, 5 minutes, because, I talk. So let me see, I would like to actually go to the question a little bit later of what is it like to have, hold on. How do you honor like having different tribes, races, nationalities in your bloodline if it's applicable? And that was related to the spiritual journey and connections to ancestors question. But I want to speed forward a little bit to that. And I wanted to say that in terms of how do I honor the different groups that we have, like as being African American, because oftentimes it's not just one or two groups, it's usually a majority. It's like we're a collage, we are like living collages. And it's something that is so beautiful for us all. It's different for me personally, it's different every day, different throughout the day. And it's something that like the intensities of which ethnic groups are advocating or trying to convey information at a time, like that is what changes each day. And it's something where how I relate to it is that I don't force it. I'm saying, like, if those spirits, it's like if those spirits claim me, then they claim me because they know what they were talking about. And also it's like a lot, it lets things come full circle. There's examples that I'm not going to share in the fullness that I could, but where actually I'm not going to share example. I'm just going to say it's really a flowy experience, and there's always new things to focus on, always something that I need to expand, and that my spirits are teaching me every time, from Pulaku, Fulani ethical codes, Soninke history on enslavement within the continent, East African fertility rights. That's all what I got going on right now. But it's a really beautiful experience. And let me see, I know we probably got 1 minute left, 2 minutes left. The question for what do you think is crucial for Black people, where you from, to understand, I want y'all to understand that as a whole, whiteness is evil. Please do not befriend children of whiteness. And it's okay to recognize non-Blackness as non-viable, because it's okay to recognize non-Blackness as non-viable. It's okay. Even if you think some people who are decent or their ancestors are putting in that work, you think, it's probably just not as true as you think. And it's something that it's okay to acknowledge that. And it's okay to focus on Blackness. It's really encouraged to focus on Blackness, because it's more so our duty to grieve for Blackness and to advocate on the side of Blackness, and all the cycles that are being interrupted from it, and just acknowledge that and work from there. Because when we put too much of our focus on whiteness and non-Blackness, things like that, it just takes away from what we actually are supposed to have dedication towards. And we have to protect ourselves and protect our spirits as well. What types of spaces are we even bringing our ancestors into, and things like that. So do I have like 30 seconds left? Do I have a little bit of time?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Now then, for what are sources of defense and protection for you? That was another question. I would say some of the sources of strength and defense and protection that show up in my life is really increasing my relationship with non-human creatures and beings, and working to overcome what we call like human supremacy. Because human supremacy is also something that has come alongside the escalation of whiteness and capitalism in this realm. And it's something that really creates a lot of disharmony onto this planet. And it be having humans thinking that we better than everybody, and that is just not true. These rocks are our ancestors, okay? These rocks, they will knock us down, all right? And it's like when these trees be talking mess about humans, just let them, because I see it. It's like, girl, you right. We be on some bullshit. But so anyway, that's been a source of strength, is just increasing the relationship with non-human creatures and beings and repairing those as well, because there's been enslavement and just a lot of domestication that's not consensual of these different beings. I mean, also only being guided by Black spirits / cultivating being guided by Black spirits, narrowing that down. In particular, even in my birth work for other people, working with spirits of the unborn, and things like that. This shows up a lot, just getting to meet and interview a range of Black spirits and Black aligned creatures, as we call them, who aren't necessarily my spirits, but they are trusted beings who are around, who are in our vicinity, and just really iconic, and just really resourceful as well, and always teaching us something new. And so that's been something that's really been strengthening. And then lastly is working with someone who my spirits label as a priest of Blackness. So there's someone who I work with personally multiple times throughout the year, where essentially the intention is realigning, just making sure that at all times I'm being realigned to the spirit of Blackness, as we refer to it, because we talk about, again, how we always just need to make sure we're in that orientation, in a Black orientation, and that anything that we do is benefiting that we don't get lost, that we don't get strayed away or taken, because that is happening to our people. And so I have someone who I work with, and I like to tell people that I consider that a form of medical care. Even when I'm budgeting, doing, my counting my expenses and things like that at the end of the month, I log that as a form of medical care, because I am not okay if I'm not in alignment with the spirit of Blackness. If I'm not in alignment with it, then I'm starting to directly put myself at risk, and I'm also starting to risk others. And so that is something that for all of us, we need to be shifting our orientations to make sure that we are serving Blackness and that we're serving the children of Blackness, because if we're not doing that, we're not okay. So thank you. I appreciate this panel so much. And I know I'm a little bit over time, and so I'll stop there for now.
It's okay. Our ancestors do nonlinear time. It's okay. I just wanted to say thank you, because on a personal note, I found your podcast a couple of months after I made a decision to drop out of graduate school for psychology. I wanted to be a therapist. And I was also at the same time doing intellectual warfare in astral world. What you're saying about language, there are words in our indigenous languages that don't exist in these mental health textbooks and that don't exist in the astral textbooks, And so how can we continue to take on white understandings of what our mental health is, or what our psychology should be, or the stars? It's harmful, And it was hard as a child of African immigrant parents, where it's like, you're expected to be a doctor, lawyer, this and this, and I was dropping out. But the academia, I just could not do, as you call it, the initiation into whiteness, where they're indoctrinating you in the academia with their knowledge system. My ancestors just could not. They just could not deal with the DSM knowledge system. And they told me that you have to focus on indigenous ancestral methods all the way. Don't mix it. Because I was like, oh, I'm going to be one of those people that's going to be a bridger. I'm going to have the Western licensure and I'm going to have the indigenous stuff. And they said, nope, not you.
Because a lot of us don't make it out. That's the truth, is that a lot of us don't make it out. So they're doing that for your protection. And
and I know that people are supposed to be helping from where they are helping. I have Black psychology professors who exposed me to indigenous African spirituality. You know what I'm saying? And they're doing their work in their community. But I feel like with my generation, with the younger generations, it's coming more and more difficult to be able to stay there. So thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to go on to Taffany. Now, Taffany is a very gifted intuitive. They have such a strong gift for divining and tapping into intuition. And our ancestors know that our intuition is a source of knowledge, right? Not just what's in a book and all of those things. So Taffany, go ahead, please share what's on your heart. You can pull from the questions or just what you feel moved to say about your spiritual journey and your ancestral work and your heritages.
Awesome. Thank you so much, guys. For some reason, I don't want to be a stereotype. I'm in Botswana. This is where I'm from and where I live. And my internet decided to die halfway through this. I was like, oh no, like, you know, people always have a stereotype about Africans not having Wi-Fi, what. And it just decided to go off, but it's okay. I'm using data now. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So my name is Taffany. You can say my full name, Taffany Kabli. If we are speaking, you can also call me Taff. And yeah, so I'm an intuitive, I am a reader, I'm a spiritualist. There's so many labels that I can put around me. But I am just someone who's been really connected to the spiritual world for such a long time. So ke Botswana, I was born in Botswana, raised in Botswana. I went to college in the US, but now I'm back. I'm back in Botswana. And yeah, it's been really interesting to do the work here and do the work that side. And yeah, I'm just here I actually have a lot to share with you guys. So I think I'm gonna jump into the questions. If anyone has questions for me later on, feel free to, let me know. So Blackness, what does that mean to me? I really had to sit with this question because it's something that has been replaying in my mind. So for me, my dad's side is Indian. And so in my own family, I struggled with my proximity or my understanding of what Blackness meant, because unfortunately on my dad's side, there was a lot of racism, right? So I'm growing up in a house, I'm the darkest, my mom's the darkest, we're Black, essentially we're Black, but we're in a family full of, light-skinned mixed people, Indians, because my dad is a first generation Indian but he was born in Botswana. So he's, Botswana, if you put him in India, he won't know what he's doing, So it's kind of like that. So for me, Blackness has presented itself to me as a kind of energy and a sacred energy, of course, but for me, it really means to be complete and whole. And I, as I was getting older, I needed to separate my definition or the way that I viewed Blackness outside of its proximity to whiteness, because I think that's how it's, how it was presented to me initially is, we are an oppressed people, we have stereotypes, there's like so many things. And I think that those definitions really lacked a lot of grace, because I felt like there was only, one way to be Black or one way to honor Blackness. And for me, it really is about being able to honor the multitude of Black experiences, honor what it is that we bring to the table. And so I really liked what Kamara was saying about it being defining it like creativity, defining it as something that's sacred, because that's what it meant for me. In terms of indigeneity, because for me, I really consider myself very lucky to have grown up, been born and raised and understanding and being in my culture and in on my ancestral land. I know that that is a privilege that I have. I understand that it's something that not everyone gets to do. And so indigeneity is about your roots, understanding where you're from, and then also being connected to the lands of your ancestors and to the practices of your ancestors and what that comes with, and yeah, it really is an honor to have been able to watch what indigenous Africans are doing and be a part of it on a daily basis. In terms of my spiritual journey, I laugh because this question is always asked to me, how did you start, how did you get into it? And for us, spirituality for Africans is just a part of our everyday. It's not something that I really thought about, but in my household growing up, my parents decided that they were going to not be as religious or strict because they grew up in very strict households. And so I really didn't grow up with a strict spiritual strict spiritual practice. It was more so that spirituality was connected to culture. And so I didn't really see it wasn't really separated, right? And so when I was like 6 or 7, I knew that I was looking for God somewhere. I didn't know what I was looking for. And so I would ask my friends and be like, hey, what religion are you part of? Or do you go to church? And so I would ask my parents to join my friends at church. And because Botswana is a predominantly Christian country, I ended up going to and seeing a lot of Christian churches, going to Sunday schools, because they couldn't really say no to me. It wasn't like I was like asking to go and party or something like that, but by the time that I was 7, I was already asking and looking for answers. And growing up, in Botswana, in Africa, we have a lot of prophets and we have a lot of pastors and we have a lot of those things. And so I go to these churches and people would tell me, this one, she has a gift, she has a calling, she's going to be a prophetess. And I would have visions and I never really understood what was going on. I would be prophesying, my mom can attest to this. I would be prophesying and I didn't really, at that time, I didn't understand what I was doing, but things always came to pass. And so I would say that I really started to lean into it maybe about... Oh, everyone, please ignore my cat. He's going a little bit feral over there. So I leaned into it maybe 5 to 6 years ago. And I think that it really started to become clearer to me as I was addressing my mental health issues. And so the clearer that my mind became, the easier it became to be able to hear my intuition more clearly, to speak to spirit and speak to my ancestors, and they'd always show up. I just didn't know what they were, and I'd always see entities, but there was no blueprint to what was going on. And both sides of my family actually practiced witchcraft. So my mom's side doesn't anymore at all. My dad's side, we don't know, but I know that there was a history of witchcraft in both my families. So there was definitely some healing to do on both sides. So my mom is from the Kalanga tribe. And the Bakalanga, they migrated, they're Bantu people as well, and they migrated from, Northeast Africa down. And so you'll find a lot of them in Zimbabwe, but they are Bakalanga in Botswana as well, and they live up north. So most of our lands are up north. And so my mom is Kalanga. And so the way that I honor those ancestors is obviously through my ancestral, my altar work, but also my ceremonies. There's like dances and the things that I can't openly discuss, but that's kind of how I do it, as well with working with certain elements like rain, because Botswana, I actually said this to Elmina, that for us, our currency, if no one knows about the currency of Botswana, it's actually pula. So pula in Setswana means rain. So the fact that we call our money rain, abundance is so closely connected to nature and to our environment. And so I work with rainwater quite a lot because we are sub-Saharan. So we are, it's very dry in the Kalahari Desert. It's very dry here. And so rain is very, very important to us. Water is very important to us. So we really, really respect water spirits as well when we go to the rivers. it's very, very important to us. On my dad's side, because, you know, I'm Indian, a lot of the ways that I honor them, they're Indian, but they're also Muslim. So for me, you'll find me, you know, there's sometimes where I will fast and I'll do my duas, and I'm always lighting incense somewhere. You know, I listen to music in Arabic, you know, the things that I incorporate into my own practice to honor them that way. And even when I'm, you know, giving my offerings, I don't just think of, oh, I'm just going to give them whatever. I'm thinking, okay, what is it that people from my ancestors really used to like, or you know, what are the traditional foods that, you know, I'll give my Kalanga ancestors. Sometimes I'll give them pane. You know, pane is a type of caterpillar that we eat. So, you know, just the little things, and I think that they really appreciate stuff like that. The ancestral knowledge that I turn for healing is history and wisdom, because, you know, I think that when we are learning about African spirituality, we sometimes forget that our ancestors were human. And not all of them, but, like, you know, a lot of them were, and we need to acknowledge that, and in acknowledging that, we acknowledge their mistakes. I'll give you an example. So for me, my mother grew up with ancestral veneration. I'm not many generations far from it. My mother grew up with ancestral worship, you understand? And they used to do Hosanna, you know, they used to do all these things, and then they shifted to Christianity. And so there's still a lot of trauma connected to this, to the spiritual practices that they were doing. And so instead of trying to figure out why certain things happened as a result, they just shunned it altogether, because colonization and everything said, well, look what's happening. You know, look at what's going on. You guys should just leave this all together, instead of giving it time to evolve and learning from their mistakes and things like that. Because, you know, there's a difference between ancestral worship and veneration, because veneration is honoring, it's helping to elevate, it's giving them life, and worship without the acknowledgement, for me, from what I've learned, working with my ancestors, without the acknowledgement of the universe, God, or of the higher power, and working together with your ancestors can bring a lot of trauma, because not all of us are going to work with all our ancestors, right? Not all your ancestors are going to want the best for you, and that's just honest truth. But the ones that do, you have to work together with them, and you're allowed to say no, you're allowed to say yes. They're just there for guidance and for help and for so many, you know, things. But, you know, I think what a lot of my ancestors, a lot of what my family got wrong was holding them to the level of gods, which I think did not help our didn't help us move forward with this kind of practice. Because right now, if you tell some of my family the work that I do, they'll be like, oh my gosh, like, why is she doing this? Because they know the history. I actually can't, you know, talk about it openly, but there's a lot of trauma there, you know. What do I think is crucial for Black people to understand? In Botswana, we have a lot of, it's not as bad as South Africa, but xenophobia is killing us. You know, xenophobia and colorism, the distractions, guys, the distractions. It's the work of white supremacy to distract us from what really is happening. I love that we're talking about spiritual warfare today, because some people will say, oh, that's not real. No. It's very real, guys. Example, I think that sometimes we are too quick to share everything with everyone. And that's how we get burned. And for me, just learning about how things, you know, like Kamara was saying, darkness is sacred. Because even you'll see in our traditions, like something like, or keeping something closed, like, for example, some of us who wear, you know, waist beads, some people show them off, some cultures it's fine, others you're not supposed to show them because it's supposed to be a form of protection. Because sometimes when you show your enemy what your tactics are, they're going to use those things against you, right? And so even so sometimes keeping things closed or keeping things to ourselves or for ourselves, because I'm telling you guys, even white folks, non-Black people, they have things that they don't share with anyone else. And I think that that's important for us to do as well. And we need to be able to protect ourselves and not let everyone see what's going on in the background. And it's so unfortunate because obviously we want to be able to share with the people, you know, with other Black folks, but I truly believe that they'll find their way to us if they truly want to. And so, yeah, you know, I'll just give one more example of keeping things away, like something like Butsetsi, which is a Botswana, it's a cultural thing, but it's where a child is born and you're supposed to stay away from people for 3 months. For 3 months, sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. It depends on what tribe you're from or what culture you're from. And it's because we understand that if you need to, you know, a baby is precious, right? A baby is so susceptible to energy. And so it's really important for us to keep them away from everyone else's things, because we know that in darkness, in keeping them away, we're protecting them from outside things. And so I think that, you know, for us, especially, you see what just happened, we need to be able to protect ourselves from others. So yeah, that's all I had to say.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate what you just said about that protection and stuff, because for those who've been following me on Instagram, you probably know that I've been taking a lot of my posts down, and I've taken a lot of my blog posts down regarding like Black and Indigenous Astro. And interestingly enough, I've had a white person who I didn't know, but who I was just following on social media, who DM'd me, said they wanted to learn from me. They want recordings of my Astro courses, this and that. The next day, they told a white person, they talked down about me to a white person. And that white person happens to be the only white friend that I do have. And so it's just interesting how white people will sometimes try and pretend like to be your friends or try and pretend like they like you just to get information when they really don't like you and really aren't in community with you at all. So we have to protect our information. We don't have to post everything that we find out about online, every spiritual insight online on public platforms. You know what I'm saying? So, and even with the situation, like I was thinking next time for registration, doing Google Forms where people can share, you know, why they're coming to this event, or a little bit more information so we can screen through the registrations through some type of questionnaire or something is important moving forward. I'm going to move the break up. I was going to have the break after the Q&A. The Q&A is going to be about 20 minutes for the speakers. I'm going to move the break up to now, and then we'll do the Q&A when we come back, just because I feel like people may need, what just happened was very triggering. People may need to, you know, recenter or whatever. So we'll come back here at 2. Okay, y'all, we're gonna come back together now. Thanks. If you all like this music, I made this on that playlist on one of my old YouTube accounts. I can put the playlist in the link. I think sound healing and music is part of our indigeneity. It's crucial to our indigeneity. So I will share that. Thank you all for still staying through these challenges. If anybody does need to leave or anything like that, that's also okay too. So we're gonna transition into our Q&A now. We're gonna start off with a question. How should I do this? I guess people can just raise their hands with the little icon thing, or if you're not able to speak and you're not able to take your, put on your mic, you can write your question in the chat, and also put, if the question is directed to a specific speaker, please put the name of that speaker. Thank you. You can also share a reflection. It doesn't have to be a question. Like maybe you have something, a realization that came up as they were speaking that you wanted to share, something that kind of moved you.
I think I would like to ask some of the panelists, fellow panelists, about just more about what are some of the things that you're recommending the community does to work against the spiritual attacks, to really begin to start to understand that in this spiritual war, we may even have like family members and friends and people that we know that are ridden by spirits. Maybe from time to time, it may not be all the time, but to have that understanding and also know that you love people, also know that you care for people. And yeah, I want to know more about that in terms of how other people are even thinking about it in the audience, in terms of like, how do we couple the love with some of the harmful actions? How do we hold all of that? And maybe you all have some insights.
I don't even know I had, hello, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes.
Yes. So one thing that I see that is not very common in like the Western, even in the healing work that is happening in Western societies that is derived from African practices, I don't see enough aggression. Is that a bad word to say? But no, I don't see enough. I don't see enough of like, you know, because it's really an energy. Because for me, now my ancestors are stern, like they're very stern. Like my, you know, my grandfather, my family, you know, very strong, proud Kalanga men. You know, yeah, there's a lot of those, and even the women, very strong, you know, Kalanga women. And so I think that being able to kind of put your, you know, because I think we say boundaries, but I don't think that we take them as seriously as we should. I think we do this thing, you know, this little dance with them, like, okay, here's a boundary, here's a boundary. But that we need to start, you know, the way that people put that foot down in other, with other races and other cultures, like people put that foot down. And I think that we need that more. We need to be a lot, because even, you know, this thing, when someone decided to come inside and start calling us the N-words and all the things, I was just watching that. You saw me, I was laughing. I was like, you think this is going to distract me? You know what I'm saying? So we need to build a lot more in our spiritual practice. We need to start to say, no such thing, love and light. No. We need to move away from that thing, and we need to take ourselves very seriously as a people. We need to say, you're not going to disrespect me. You understand? Even in my culture, when someone is talking to, when they see a term of respect, mo Botswana, is calling someone a white person. Do you know how painful it is to be I'll be pumping gas and someone says, look, that means my white person. And I just look at them, I'm like, that is very disrespectful, but it's seen as a term of disrespect. A term of respect. So we need to start to be more, we need to stop, being complacent. We need to start to, really pump it into people to understand like, we're not putting up with this stuff anymore. We're done. We're finished, So I think we need a lot more of that. And I think we're a little bit soft, some of us, So that's just my take. I'm gonna go now. Thank you.
That definitely resonated. I love that you said no love and light, okay? Because war isn't something that's always pretty. As rarely is it pretty, you know what I'm saying? And stuff like this happens. And I think it's really important to recognize like, even just like the different elements to what's going on, like when they attack, like what does the attack actually look like and what's actually happening when they do it, because that also help us a little bit know how to counter it at the root. So even like with who was just speaking, is it Tiffany? I don't want to pronounce it wrong. I forgot how you had said it at first.
Yes, it's Tiffany.
Okay, perfect. With what you were saying, when it was your time to talk, when it was your time, you were mentioning like the different abuses that happen, and you listed that being a really perfect example, honestly. But I was thinking about it, and realizing like even in that incident, like they stole from likely a Black sex worker or a Black male, like just a Black male person who was a Black person who was engaging in this type of activity, that where obviously he was working with his sexual self, and they likely stole that, and that was a crime in itself, and then used our own people to attack us, and then came out with these really disgusting words as well, that were racialized and full of whiteness and anti-Blackness. So it was just a lot of different facets to that, where it was a sexual crime against that person too, and they used that. So it was a crime in a lot of different ways. I definitely agree with just having a stronger level of militancy needing to be present. And there was a part of the question that was being asked where it was not just about how to protect against spiritual attacks, like what just happened as an example, but also even going back to what was being spoken about earlier with the idea of people getting ridden by other spirits. It was just having me think about some things that have shown up in my family, for example, and just it's really important for us to not be afraid to direct others to specialized people, like specialized cultural workers, for support as well. Like just knowing, it's really important to know who your local root doctor is. It's also important to know who your local conjurers are, who can help address these issues as well. And so that's what had came to mind too. We have to not only like return to our roles, but also be okay with listing each other as resources, and connecting one another to people who might be all the way on the other side of the city or on the other side of the state. If they're Black and if they're in great contact with their ancestral practices, their ancestors, and you feel like they have a good heart that is covered in Black spirits as well, that they are covered in Black spirits as well, then we have to share that with one another. We have to protect ourselves in that way too, and just help each other out.
I just want to build on your point, because Tay has a podcast, Tay in the Water podcast, and one of their episodes they talk about alliances and the importance of relationships in times of war. And to me, when I was listening to it, I just found your podcast at a great time, in that like I was going through a rough time and I was feeling alone in a lot of things, like being treated like the person who's too extreme, the Black person is doing too much, and And it was just very refreshing to listen to that. And also from an astrological perspective as well. I'm a tropical and sidereal astrologer, and I'm also been looking into indigenous cosmologies, which is about working with the stars, the fixed stars, and with the sun and the moon, which predates the tropical and sidereal astrology we're doing now, you know. And they talk about in Western tropical astrology that most people are familiar with, they talk about how Mars, which is an energy that deals with war, not just war, but that's part of it, is weak when it's in the sign of Libra, which is relationships. And I, from an indigenous African perspective, just don't see that. Having alliances is crucial, you know, to when you're dealing with spiritual, psycho-spiritual warfare, or any type of warfare. And we have to support each other and recommend each other, like you're saying. When you would have your workshops and stuff, I keep retweeting it. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have to not, some people with hyper individualism, there's this competition thing, like, oh, because I'm doing this, I can't like retweet anybody else's stuff. I can't post any other people's stuff on my page. And we have to move away from that, because no one person can do all of this. A lot of people need help, and acting like just a couple of healers are going to be the one to do it, a couple of readers, a couple of herbalists, no. And so what we're trying to actually do to build this network up, everything is just about capacity and resources, right? But we are shifting in the direction now this year that we've started setting up mighty networks, which is basically like Facebook groups without Facebook, because we know Zuckerberg is on Facebook and he don't care about Black people. He don't even care about Jewish people, and he's Jewish. So that's a serious red flag, right? So anyway, we want to have, over time, build a directory of people who are using indigenous approaches and who are grounded in ancestral work, right? I'm emphasizing this. I talked about why are we changing our name earlier. Our name was Indigenous Mental Health Awareness Network International, Imani, previously. And now we're transitioning to a new name, Coalition for Ancestral Indigenous Mental Health Approaches. And the reason why we made that shift is because a lot of people approach indigenous spirituality, but they're coming from the new age perspective, which just cherry picks different cultures from around the world and then puts love and light on it and doesn't address oppression and doesn't teach you about your ancestors, right? So it's a very extractive form of spirituality that doesn't put the ancestors first and our own higher selves, our own intuition first as well. So I just wanted to say that it's so important for us to build alliances, to learn from each other, to share each other's work. And moving forward, we will edit this recording because the debacle that happened, and then we'll post it in the Mighty Networks group, and then people can connect there if they would like to build connections moving forward and stuff like that. But the alliance piece is so important, and capitalism tells you that you just have to pull up yourself by your bootstrap, hyper individualism, me, I have to compete, and we have to move away from that. So.
Yeah, I think I just want to say that going back to just how this war, how they enact things is a lot around sexuality and sexual trauma. And it's important for us to take care of ourselves when it comes to like healing our sexual trauma. And I agree with you, Elmina, that a lot of the people out here who are kind of just using new age tactics, they're not powerful enough to deal with the kind of healing that people of African descent have to do. And I find that even as therapists, it's like really hard for me to, I agree with you, Elmina, that you probably made the best choice by getting out of grad school. And, you know, I went through a lot of horrific things in grad school. And I think that it taught me a lot about how that profession never, I tell people all the time, do not see white clinicians. Do not see white clinicians. I went to school with them. I've interned with them. They do not care about Black and brown people. And it's kind of like, and that's hard to say, but you don't want to open yourself up if you're going to do that at all in a psychotherapy way. And I just think it's speaking to how people are trained and what they're embodied in. So yeah, but I'm sorry that some people were traumatized. I wish I had caught how to put that person out earlier, but yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just reading the comments from Kay now because I was speaking while they were writing that. And Kay is somebody who I found this year through a mutual on social media. They're also a Black woman astrologer who's faced anti-Blackness and misogyny and astral spaces from white people, but also non-Black people and our own Black people, right? And going back to what we were saying earlier, like, so it just gets to a point where we have been strong and we do have to be strong and we do have to defend ourselves, right? And not let certain things get to us, but we have to understand that some of us have been strong for a long time and are tired, you know? And so we need to we can still use the word strong, but I know for Black women in the United States, in the context, like the strong Black woman trope that is used here, there is like this idea that we constantly have to be the ones to fight for the community, right? And we have been the ones. All the Black men in leadership, a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, there is a Black femme or a Black gender expansive person, a marginalized gender person, actually holding it down. And sometimes we are tired. So I'm glad that they did take that space to recenter themselves. They're not in the space to really be here right now because it's too triggering and it's too traumatic. So I think it's important for us to review our relationship with the word strength. There was somebody who had their hand up. Was it Alikis? Am I saying that right?
It's Alex.
Alex, sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna turn my camera on actually. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much for putting together this panel. This was just like, this is medicine, okay? Like, for real, I appreciate this so much. So the question that I have, and I didn't want to be that one, but I'm really hoping for this to kind of integrate into me. Not that I need more convincing, but so just for a little bit of background, part of the lens that I come at just like healing and spiritual work is through my gift of being able to see right on through people, right? Through to people's souls, right? And through this work, I've heard and just like being able to see a darkness, a physical darkness, a density around people's light source when they are feeling a lot of resentment, a lot of guilt, when they have ancestral, when all their ancestors have a lot of resentment, guilt, fear, trauma, right? It shows up as like a dark density. That's what it looks like to me. And I've found that like, and so through like my work with like working with different spirits, a part of my work has been like getting them to release certain things that are binding them so that they can move on, so that they can return to source. And what I've found was that in this conversation and in people who do this type of soul work, that light gets associated with love, with source, with God, with creation, and darkness, including Blackness, right, gets associated with difficulty and challenge and lessons and density, right? And like light is physically light, right? And so I'm wondering what do you all have to say to that, to break that down? I also come from a place, I live in Madison, Wisconsin, so it is very, 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 very white. And I have not had access to any of this juiciness. Like, I have, most of what I have learned is only been like straight from spirit. Like, and so I need some help decolonizing this construct that is embodied in me. I hope that question made sense. Let me know if y'all need some clarity, but I'm hoping.
Made perfect sense.
Okay, okay.
I'm gonna let the speakers go, but I'm gonna drop a post that I wrote on Instagram, literally on this topic about 2 weeks ago, about like why I don't really resonate with the term shadow work and darkness of being bad and light being good. There are things in the light that are very bad that we can see very clearly. Like we see racism very clearly in the light every day, right? We see it on camera, right? And that's in the light. That is very visible and it's bad. So I think it's so important for us to let go of that new age mentality. And I'll share something I wrote on that there and give it to the rest of the speakers. So comment.
I think it's more about understanding that the places that the white supremacists don't want you to go is inward, and inward is into your darkness. Inward is into that which is your power, that which is that which gives you life. Darkness gives us life. We were, for 9 months, maybe some of us more or less, in a womb of darkness. And it's where we thrive, but it's also about mystery. It's also about the unknown. And I feel like symbolically, and maybe not even so much, is that people of African descent, we have a mystery to us. I think our true powers are almost unknown to us in a weird sense. I mean, we're discovering it, but I think there's so much more to who we are. And we have to be able to let go of this like colonization, this all of the trauma, not let it go, but heal it, or get to a place where we can start to see how this darkness feeds us and enlivens us and is critical to who we are. So it is important to not use darkness as shadow, even though you understand what people are talking about, but it's like confronting yourself on all levels, not just in the darkness, right? I don't know if any of that made sense, but I was just speaking from what I was feeling.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So I also wanted to add to that because like I was talking about earlier when I was saying, like darkness, blackness is sacred, and how Africans traditionally in a lot of our cultural things will keep things in darkness because we understand that that's where they need to grow and that's how they can be protected. So if darkness is protection, then we know that it's vital. And then when you think about like, even when you are saying like its relationship to creation, even the birth process is that the child is literally in the womb growing in darkness. And even from a a nature perspective, is growing, a seed is going to grow in darkness in the soil. So even from my perspective, from an African perspective, for sure, darkness has always been needed for light to even exist, and to have that contrast is so necessary for us, because darkness brings balance. Darkness is about balance. And so yeah, I hope that that actually helps with that. I did want to also quickly address the thing with Kay, because I did realize as I was talking about us needing to be more rigid, a little bit more rigid in our protection, to make sure that we are not letting these things phase us. But of course, like, triggers are going to happen. Of course, like, we cannot control how how our trauma affects us, especially if you're still in the process of healing. So I did want to address and say that, I'm not saying that we should now be these strong Black women, because I think we do that also here. They like to put that label on us, but I think that in terms of protecting our own energy, we owe it to ourselves to make sure that we are putting almost all of our effort into protecting ourselves. And that also means being able to step away and not have to, fight the fight sometimes. Sometimes that means being able to just take care of your mental health and your well-being, and so being more stern and strong. I hate that word. I'm trying to use a different word, but I don't know how to do it. But just fiercely protecting yourself. Okay, thank you.
Going back to the question, it reminded me actually of a few different things. One of the things was when I'm working with someone who might be new to taking spiritual baths, actually, and usually there's like a part of the protocol is, okay, try to wear something light after, saying don't try to, it's really nice to like try to avoid like wearing dark colors after that. I usually take my time to explain that it's not because wearing something like wearing black or wearing a dark color is bad, especially if it got to do with your lineage colors. That's a whole other thing. But it's not because it's bad, but because when we think about Blackness, it's a lot of different things, but it's also very literally like, absorbing, it's kind of like Blackness is everything. It's a combination of all the different colors up in one. And, it's also like a voidness, a place to grow, just like Tiffany said. Like those are all things that have shown up like in my practice of how we usually talk about like dark colors and also Black in particular, that they're like more absorbing. And there's always going to be like a place for them, always going to be a place for them. So even like when it comes to, I'm just going with the spiritual bath example, because that's what it made me think of right away. But so even when it comes to like, oh, well, why are you wearing a light color or white? Like, why do you have to do that right after you've, cleanse yourself? Is because white and like lighter colors tend to be more reflective. Like they carry oftentimes more of a reflective like energy. Like think about if you're wearing a mirror, like it tends to let energies like bounce off of it in a distinct way, whereas Black is more absorbing. And so it just made me think of that question, made me think of that, and just like expanding how we think of those things. But like again, we all have to engage in this process of like learning and unlearning. And so when it comes to like trying to reject or when it comes to this practice of rejecting like white and anti-Black terminologies and ways of seeing things, one way to do that is, just to take a minute before you say something, say what you mean. Think about what you actually mean. Like if you hear somebody, saying, just referring to Blackness or darkness in like a evil way, like just be like, well, why you ain't just say evil? Why you ain't just say grim, gloomy? What I'm saying? Just like say what you actually mean. Like it's okay to like take a beat, and think about like substituting like words and things like that. Like that's something that, we do have to like just continue practicing to unlearn and learn and things like that. But just ultimately know that Black is good and it's holy. And I think that for me and my personal life, that's something that understanding continues to just to grow even more with the work that I do, and then even just coming into more and more with Oromo traditional religion. The creator God in Oromo traditional religion is also called like the Black God. you know, is called Waka Guracha, the Black God, or even like the Black Crow. And so there's a lot like in the prayers and everything like for Waka that just forces to remind ourselves that Blackness is like where all the creative energy comes from, and is like the source of everything. And so, yeah, I just wanted to add that piece, and I hope that that was helpful and just like a helpful contribution to the answer.
Yeah, it's definitely helpful. I did speak to the idea of the absorbent energy of Blackness. Kamara, if you can, I could just share the screen so folks can see it, because folks really want to see this and they're not able to see it right now. Michelle can't see it. It's not a long post. But if you can share it on the one that doesn't have my pronouns, the one that I'm speaking from, because I know both of I have 2 Elmina accounts on here right now to share the screen. Okay, you got it. You're able to pull
Is this
it up.
the one?
Okay.
This is the one?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's basically what it is. And basically in the second slide, in this slide, I was talking about the absorbing, you know, of the energy, and also how like I was saying earlier, there are things that are visible that are harmful to us that we can see on TV everywhere, right? But in the next slide, I just shared an MLK quote where he was talking about language, going back to this understanding of language earlier, which Kay brought up, and which I also always like try to emphasize with people. And our ancestors talked about this. MLK talked about it. Frantz Fanon talked about it. The language is a huge thing, right? And so he talked about how everything Black was made to be evil, but there's just a lot of power in Blackness. And when we're talking about the hidden things that things that are hidden, sometimes the thing that is hidden is a gift. Hidden Blackness just means it's the all, and you may not know all of it yet, you know? And if you could go to the second slide, the third slide, actually. Oh, no, on that same post, but just go to the second slide. The third, actually, sorry. You see the little, yeah, there, yes. And so the third one, the Mary Baraka. Ancestor Mary Baraka, he's my chart twin in astrology, my tropical chart twin, Libra sun, Libra rising, Virgo moon. And he was very big ancestor in the Black arts movement. And he said that Blackness, the concept of oneness, is old and Black and spiritual. And what Taffany said in the beginning, if y'all remember that, when she thinks about Blackness, she's thinking about oneness, wholeness, being complete, right? And so if we have referred to shadow work as like soul work, right? Going into the shadow, into the darkness to, yes, tend to wounds, if that's what you're saying, say a wound, but also tend to gifts or things that may have been overlooked, or things that colonization may have hidden from us. There are gems in our lineages that we need to resurrect, or that we need to reactivate, is another way to look at what's in the dark, right? And so this is about being complete. This is about being whole. And maybe if you took a spiritual bath, you don't want to do things like go outside and, you know, wear darker colors because you just cleared yourself. You want everything. You don't want to be picking up on everybody and, you know, all those types of things, right? At that specific time, you may have designated a part of the darkness that you want to explore, right? So those are the things that we can think about. And that's basically what the post was. It wasn't that long of a post. So I was like, let me just share it. I do see that we have 2 questions, but we kind of like broke the event up so that we could have a healing circle with like more discussion afterwards, but devote more of this time to the panelists. So what we're going to do now is we're going to transition into that. And then we wanted to do sound healing and Reiki, me and Angie. Angie's going to do the Reiki, and then we will go back to those questions. Is Taffany still here? Okay, so our speakers are still here. I let them know that they can stay for the healing circle if they want to, but I wasn't sure if they were still going to be here. But I'm also trying to look at the time and the stuff that we had also planned in, but I don't want to miss y'all questions. So we'll do the questions, but I want us to get into the Reiki portion and the sound healing portion, which is basically being done to help set the intention for us to connect with our own ancestors, right? Whoever your own ancestors are. Is that okay?
That sounds
Is everybody okay with that? Okay.
to me.
Okay, so Angie's here. Angie, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Angie. My pronouns are she and they. I run a herbal apothecary, and I do divinations, tarot and oracle readings, and energy work. I also am a youth worker. Um, also dropped out of grad school, so was going into social work, but decided to pivot and to focus more on community work, spiritual. I'm also a doula and I do Reiki. So technically, the Reiki's already going. I already have candles lit here. And the intention for the Reiki today was around community and being grounded and being connected to community, being connected through love, being connected through truth, being connected through authenticity, through all spaces and time, and really calling in soul family, calling in protection was a lot of what I saw and a lot of what I was setting the intention for. And there's just a couple of months as well. So I feel like the collective, collective trauma, I was more so sending a light to everyone, sending a light of protection, protection of vulnerable people, children, and the global diaspora as well. And there was just like so much that was brought up that I was setting the intentions as like folks were asking questions, that in that I felt called to bring up what I used with the Reiki candle, which was my protection oil. And it's literally I am connected. It's a third eye protection oil, but I use it mostly for my head. And I put it in my hair and I put it in on my third eye, like on my neck, on my hands and on my feet. I'm gonna get into like the oil a little bit, but I really want to call everyone to just breathe and be present in their bodies. I was definitely feeling that, especially with what happened and that sudden folks coming in or whatever spiritual attack that felt like. I give thanks to the folks that handled it. I believe it was Kamara, thank you, and Alina. And just thinking about the different ways, like we cannot, there's not a trigger warning for everything. Some things just like happen. And I think that the intention when lighting a candle and lighting this candle in particular, when the intention gets carried out, it feels kind of like a stillness and like how do you create that protection within yourself, and really welcoming folks to do that in this space right now. So I just wanted to give thanks to some of these herbs, and one of them being before that happened, before that person came in, I was kind of lighting rue. And I've been working with rue a lot for the past couple of months. And in this oil, there is rue. So I just give thanks to rue for grounding, for its protective properties. Passion flower, mugwort, agrimony, there's hyssop, bay leaves, herba santa, rosemary, marshmallow root, vervain. I really love vervain. I love working with it in terms of teas as well. Vervain is a really good medicinal herb that helps with processing PTSD, traumas. If you're feeling anxiety, vervain is a really grounding, stabilizing, protecting herb to work with. So there's definitely vervain in this. Echinacea, for its connection to the ancestors. Angelica, for its connection to Saint Michael. Angelica, I've also heard, has a connection to Allegra, but it is a protective herb. And mullein, calendula, root, life everlasting, and rose. So some protective herbs against pestilence, against illness, against anything that is not sweet and gentle. Not that we cannot be anything other than, but I feel like when we are tending to ourselves, similarly, like if we were started, we are and we are detailed, are present in our bodies and being intentional with how we're planting seeds. So really thinking about the seeds that we're planting within ourselves and being gentle in that. And it's also kind of making me think of like, earlier we were speaking about the use of the word darkness and it's like shadow work, and like to describe the, I guess, pain and sorrow and things that we go through, rather than acknowledging the inner child work that is happening and the unearthing ourselves, and planting those seeds. So
we are going to now transition back into the talking space. I just wanted to share briefly a few tips before we open up for questions again about connecting to ancestors. And even with this drum, right? And how Indigenous cultures treasure music so much, and how it also even translates into a lot of our languages. In Southern Bantu tradition of Ubungoma, which is very common in South Africa and also in some parts of like Botswana and Lesotho and stuff like that. The name of the tradition and the name of the diviner in the tradition, Sangoma, it means person of the drum or person of rhythm. That word Goma means drum in a lot of Bantu languages. You'll see it in Congo, you'll see it in Angola, you'll see it a lot of places. And so our words always have like a depth to it, which is why we have to go look at our languages even more deeper. Because sometimes, because of colonization, even people who may have been born and raised on the continent, the translation of a word was altered when the white man was translating their languages into English. I saw this thread a couple of months ago, and I got upset because I couldn't find it after that. I don't know if the account got deleted or I just didn't save it or what. But they were talking about how the word in Yoruba for that they now say in English is police officer, it didn't actually mean police officer. It meant a person, it was a gender neutral thing, person who's walking with a staff, right? And so we know that staffs are used in a lot of Indigenous traditions to represent connection to the earth, connection to the ancestors, to guide the path while we're walking. And so when we look at our ancestors' justice systems, they always involved, like, turning to spirit to see what's going on, right? Turning to spirit to see who did this misdeed in the community and how are we going to address what was done? And how is how's their soul going to address this? And so right now our justice system is controlled by policemen, right? Who've been trained by white supremacy and all of that. But I'm just saying all that to say language is actually a very important place to start when we're talking about connecting with our ancestors, even if it's just the Ebonics or the Pidgin English, which is like a Creole, the Patois. We have Pidgin English where I'm from, and Anglophone part of Cameroon, which they also have in Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and places like that. You will see that our languages and our words are telling us something if we look a little bit deeper. What Tay said about the animals or the non-human creatures, nature and the animals is also very important. And one of the reasons why I felt very connected to Bantu traditions is because they emphasize the animal stuff a lot. Like, and that is emphasized in all African spirituality, the whole continent as well. But I had not seen it to that degree in the West African traditions that is more known for us in the United States and stuff like that, in terms of what you can easily find online. Like, you go to certain places in Zimbabwe and their last name will be an animal, because it's like what animal totems were in your family. You know, another thing that you can use to connect to your ancestors besides meditation and prayer, which we always on libations, we know about those things. And I can also share resources about that in the recording. But what your affinities are, what skill sets are repeating in your family, or what ancestor are you like if you act like a particular person. Another thing can even be food or drinks that you may gravitate towards, or that were put on your path, or even herbs. It may feel unintentional, but one of the herbs in the tea that I mentioned at the beginning, which is rooibos, right? Now, I started drinking rooibos my freshman year of college. This was like fall 2013, right? And I was looking for teas to help lower cholesterol, because cholesterol is an issue that's been in my family, and it's something I always pay attention to. You know, what can I use to get that cholesterol under control? And it was just one of the many herbs that came up, and for some reason, someone gave it to me, and I drank it, and I gravitated towards it, so I kept drinking it. And I fell off of it over the years, and they stopped drinking tea for a while, but I'm starting to get back on my tea train, right? But I'm mentioning this because your ancestors will communicate with you through things, even if you don't know of them, or if you don't know that that's in your spiritual lineage. And being somebody who is a continental African from Cameroon, which is Central Africa, and then also I have some West African on my grandfather's side from Togo. I didn't start my spiritual journey by learning about Southern Bantu traditions or what they do in South Africa or Botswana or anything like that, because I didn't think it was important, because I'm not from there and I already know where I'm from, right? But years on my spiritual journey, multiple years, I came across this tradition. I started researching, and I started seeing words that are the same in my mother's language that they also have in places like Zulu, Botswana, and Lesotho, especially. It's especially the Lesotho stuff is very strong. But that whole general region, you can find some common words. And I learned that I had ancestors that were in Tanzania and Great Lakes area, in East Africa and Southeast Africa, and that they were a second round of Bantu migrations of people that went to the original Bantu land, to Cameroon. So my ancestors actually got to Cameroon 500, 600 years ago. And the initial Bantu migration, which started as early as 1500, 2000 years ago, they were one of the first earlier ones to leave and migrate. And then they migrated back, which is very interesting. And so this tea, the rooibos tea, is tea that they drink down there, that they've learned from the Khoisan people, which they met when they got down there, and is very important to their traditions. But I was drinking it and felt gravitated towards it several years before I even learned about this connection, but they were with me through that plant, right? So things that you gravitate towards, herbs, foods, we have to like kind of look deeper to see like, where do these things come from? I felt like that was a long-winded way of explaining that, but I felt it was important to say this, because a lot of times with ancestral work, we think it's this long, complicated process. And it is a long process. It does take us some time, but there are certain things that are more simpler that we may overlook or that are right in front of us that we didn't realize that we should go deeper because of our preconceived notion of what we think our ancestry is. And so I just felt it was important to name that. And if anybody has any other questions, I know Joanne and Michelle had questions. I don't know if Michelle is still in here or if those questions were directed towards Tay or the other speakers, but if anybody has general questions on how to cultivate awareness to connect with ancestors, I think food is a way, plants is a way, music is a way, and language is a way, in addition to the prayer, the meditation, and the libations, which you don't need names for, right? You can just say loving, honorable ancestors that are protected with me and that are aligned with my higher self as well. I specify this because, as we were saying earlier when Taf was speaking, not all ancestors are, you know, gonna be aligned with your mission or your path. There are people who are living in my family who, I know people who are Trump supporters and all this type of stuff. And it's just like, and that's living. That's not even some of the ancestors who made mistakes. We talked about ancestors making mistakes, right? And that we can learn from their mistakes. And some of my ancestors were kind of misjudged as the white people, and they were too friendly with them. And they, you know, the white people tricked them and even killed some of them. And so now my ancestors are making sure that I don't repeat the mistake of, you know, mingling with white people so much, and just letting them, you know, take over and stuff like that, which is why I have some very militant ancestors. And so when you have ancestors that made mistakes, whether it's something like this, or maybe we have, some people can have like, you have like criminals that may have been in your lineage, like maybe this person was a rapist, or maybe this person killed people, or whatever the case was. You don't have to call that energy in. You can call in the ancestors that are already aligned with you, already assigned to you. In my mediumship readings, I've worked with adopted people who don't have names. And even though I have names, some of the surnames from further back on certain part of my lineages I don't have, because colonization was just that violent, which is why people assume I'm African American when they meet me, because my last name is Bell, right? So we have to think about the fact that our connection to our ancestors is energetic first and foremost. The research, it helps supplement, it helps us put certain pieces together, but the energetic intent to say, yes, I want to commit to meeting the ancestors aligned with me in my path, that is the most important thing you need, the foundational thing you need to actually start opening the door for them to communicate with you. So let me see what's going on in the chat here. Okay, she shared the herbs. Yeah, this sound issue. Yeah, because the thing is, like, I think I may have used my phone one time and still didn't have an issue. I think there's just something weird going on today. I don't know. But yeah, does anybody have any questions about ancestral work or ancestral connections that they want to share? Okay, and Taffany corrected me, our language is called Siswana, yes.
I also wanted to add, as someone who's been doing a lot of my trauma was around my voice, and some of the more recent ancestral work I was doing, it was important. Like my ancestors were like, you need to sing, and I think that a singing, and it's funny that you mention it, Almina, like some things that you gravitate towards and you're not sure why. But I remember when I started doing more like maybe just altar or shrine work, I would just start singing or humming. But and I kind of included in my prayers every morning, just a light song. But I don't know if other people have encountered that, but the singing is also very important. And I think that as a society, at least a lot of people think that only certain people are singers. And I feel like we have to we have to restore singing to everyone. Yeah.
This is a topic that I can jump on for sure.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I am not sure if everyone read the description, but I am a singer. I am a singer, and healing my throat center was just so important to my ancestors, and they were the ones that actually really pushed me to open myself up to singing, but also just from how do I explain this? In my cultures, singing is so important. Like you'll be together as a family, or you'll even just the community, and there's so many songs that you just know, like you don't know where you got them from, but you just know them, and so we're all singing together, we're clapping our hands, and it creates this like really almost cathedral like essence where you like just feel so elevated by that. And even like songs that are common, like we'll usually turn them into like more traditional songs, even if it's something as you guys are gonna laugh, but like something as interesting as like Rihanna's Umbrella. Like we say, like there was a time where they turned it into a traditional song, and they were singing it like all in unison, and it sounded like, if you didn't know Rihanna's version, you would think that this version was the right one, and so we're always innovative as Black people and as Africans, and it's just so cool that we can share that. And even I was thinking about the song that Elmina shared, that I just released, called Everywhere. The cover for that was actually shot in a cave called Kuza Cave, where I went to visit this cave that's sacred to the people of Zanzibar, and they actually found ancestral, they found human bone, they found like things left over, like artifacts and things of their ancestors in the cave and around that area of the cave. And actually when I went there, I actually did bring offerings for the ancestors there, and I prayed when I got there and when I left, and I spoke to them, and I was like, please help me to release this song. I don't know, because I was really struggling with opening my being vulnerable in my voice, and the fact that this is the cover, me in the cave is the cover to this song that was being supported by these ancestors that weren't even mine, but because I feel like I came from a respectful place, they were able to help me through that. So guys, please sing, even if you don't know, even if you don't like your voice, it doesn't matter, your ancestors will like it. Like, please do it.
Hi, Elmina.
Hello.
Hi, I didn't have a question. What I wanted to say earlier is I've been on Zooms before with for just people of African descent and Black people. And one of the things that could be done in the future is when you let people in, let them into a like a small room and ask to turn on your camera. Like that, like I've been to spaces where in order for us to be safe, that it is only Black people there, that we see the faces before we let them into the main room.
Yes, so you're saying like in the waiting room, there's a way to see their face before admitting them while in the waiting room. Okay, thank you.
Or put them in another room to wait before
Okay, right.
in the main room.
Okay, okay. Yes, that's a really good idea. Thank you so much for sharing that.
No problem.
This point about music that keeps coming up, I think is really important because music is connected to rhythm. and balance as well on an energetic level, right? So physically you're hearing the song, but it's also about energetically being in tune and listening to your inner rhythm, which is your intuition and the spirits that are around you and guiding you. And it's connected to this idea of listening, which Kamara brought up in the beginning. And a lot of times tuning into nature helps us to listen. And me growing up in a city, I grew up in Washington, D.C., a very busy city, and I didn't grow up in a part of the city that is close to nature, because we do have a park called Rock Creek Park that does have like nature in it. There's like deer and different animals in there, but I don't live in that small part of DC. I live in a very busy part. And so I wasn't accustomed to that. And when I started my spiritual journey, doing the nature thing was hard, because I was like, oh, like, well, there's going to be bugs and it's just going to be weird. Like, what if an animal comes and this and that? But after like years, it took me about 2 years to actually hear the spirit in the nature more deeply, and the animals. I started noticing animals even in the busier part of the city that I was, that were always there at certain points in certain seasons, but I just didn't pay attention to them because I wasn't slowing down enough, because I was trying to catch the train, or because I was on my phone, or because I was running for the bus, or whatever. I was just in my head. And I think that we as Black people, we have a natural rhythm. Even if you didn't sing in choirs or growing up or learn how to do music, we have a natural rhythm energetically that connects us to nature and how spirit works. And it takes time sometimes, depending on how much conditioning we've been through, to get back to that listening. And this is what we call, from Ancestral Malidoma Patrice Some's perspective, like spiritual literacy, right? Like indigenous spiritual literacy, which I made a document for this too. I'm gonna put those documents in the chat because it may take a couple of days for us to get to this recording to y'all, so you all can have it now. I'm gonna put that in the chat. I'm also gonna put a doc about connecting through the elements, ancestors communing through the elements through animals. I've had birds speak to me, like literally speak to me, and I wasn't on drugs. I was not tripping. As a matter of fact, I've never done weed in my life. I don't do I cannot take the type of mushroom that makes you go on a trip because of the mental health conditions that I have. It's just not advisable to do those kinds of things. And I don't really want to, because I'm already tripping while I'm awake, or what we call connecting or whatever. But those are things that we were called crazy for, or that we were called insane for, which is also part of why this org was created, because Black people going through spiritual issues, POC going through spiritual issues, and this org is open to all races, by the way. It's just that we were having this event just for Black people. We had another event just for Black people 2 years ago as well, which you'll see in our past event recordings that we can send out. But the Western medical complex wants to make a disease out of our spiritual ways of connecting. And you have people who are going through mental health crisis, or who are seeing things, or who are hearing things, or experiencing things that the Western world will just want to suppress, rather than be curious to see where it's coming from or what's being communicated with. Okay, Tap said they have to leave. Okay, thank you, Taffany, so much. Yes. And so we have to start getting back to that. And something else that I wanted to bring as we wrap up, and we have we can go for about another 10, 15 minutes if people want to talk. When it comes to Indigenous spirituality, a lot of times people go to deities, and then they skip over their ancestors and go to deities, right? And deities are there and they can help us, but they work from a different domain than ancestors work from, And it's so important for us to understand that our ancestors, the types of ancestors we have, will pave the way for the rest of what our journey is, right? Starting with your higher self and your ancestors is key, because it lays the foundation for what types of indigenous practices or spiritual practices may help you, or what types of deities can help you. You know what I'm saying? And I think it's really important. There's a elder, Ia Ifalomo. They always will go, I think their English name is Ambrosine Laguerre. They made this tweet about how a lot of times people are talking to Orisha and they should be talking to their ancestors, and they're initiated in Orisha tradition. They're also initiated with Falo, which is one of the Bantu traditions. But they were talking about how sometimes our ancestors are so desperate for our connection that they might dress up or take the form of an Orisha or disguise themselves as an Orisha just to get folks' attention. And so we kind of have to, as a collective, get back to making our ancestors the key, which is why we were really intentional in our name change and putting the ancestral indigenous in our name, because we didn't want to give people the impression that we are doing things that are more vague or that are not like as streamlined. And we think that ancestral wisdom, healing generational issues in the family and within yourself, and tapping into the ancestors assigned to you is very, very important and can open up many things. My ancestors have communicated to me through dreams, through animals, come as elements, all these different things. And sometimes people are quick to put that to deities. And so I just wanted to name that. Our ancestors work with deities. You know, I'm not saying they didn't work with them. Some of these deities are collective ancestors. So they are people who, some of them are people who, they did so much for the community when they were alive a long, long, long time ago that everybody started venerating them, even people who weren't blood related. So those things are also there. But I just feel that it's important, if people remember nothing from this, like, please remember that the ancestors that are assigned to you in your mission, they are there to protect you, they're there to guide you, and that when it comes to the painful things and the mistakes, like we were talking about earlier, you don't have to call that energy in. And I don't like to tell other people what to do with their practices, be it their personal practices or if it's a spiritual practice, they're a reader. But for me, when it comes to ancestors who have been abusive, or if people have a racist ancestor or whatever the case is, we don't call on them. But I will say that sometimes, depending on where the soul is in their development, some ancestors change once they get to the other side. They change their behavior, they start reflecting, they start reflecting and realizing that they've made mistakes, and they start trying to make amends from that realm. And I noticed that within my own, I won't go into the long detail of it now, but even in my own lineage, there was an ancestor that I didn't put on my altar because I didn't like certain things that they did, and I honestly didn't know them that well. But in my mediumship class, my mediumship teacher saw them when my mediumship teacher was reading me, and I was like, there's no way she knows who this man is, right? So she was definitely on point with this reading and like describing who it was, and I was able to pick up on who it was. And she was saying that he said that he's sorry. And I could feel in my spirit that there had been a shift once I became receptive to what she was saying. And I also know that my higher self made the decision before I even got to that class. They connected me with that teacher. They were like, okay, this is going to be one of your teachers, right? And they wouldn't have allowed that spirit to come through to my teacher had that spirit not done the work yet or started to do the work, right? So what I'm getting at is, if a spirit has changed or they have made amends or whatever, they will make it known somehow. You won't have to go look for them, you know. That's just the way I work. I don't think that it's our jobs to go out of our way to try and connect with people who have not made intentions to try and connect with us. And this will vary on a case-by-case individual basis. You'll feel in your spirit whether the energetic work has been done and whether you want to venerate this person or not, or try and heal things with this person. And we should start with the ancestors that have been assigned to us and that have been with us from the get, right? Which can take time to know their names. It can take time. They can communicate various ways, but we just have to be patient and persistent, because they do come through for us, even long before we even got into this work, right? They have been looking at us from the spiritual realm since we were kids and all of those things. And even siblings have different guides. Is my sister still in here? Yeah, she's still in here.
Yeah.
My sister and I, we are full blood sisters. We have the same pool of ancestry, right? We have the same collective pool, but even us have different specific ancestors that were assigned to us as our head ancestors, right? Because we do similar things, but we may have different paths in life. Like, let's say if your sibling is an engineer and you are a school teacher or you're a doctor or whatever, you're going to have different specified guides. You'll have the same collective pool that you can call to from time to time and you need help, or that you just want to honor or revere or lift up. But there are specific ones that are just for you, even twins who were born at the same time. So those are things to also remember. Does anyone have any questions?
I don't have a question, but I feel really moved to add this piece. I think it's one of my ancestors. But something that I've learned through my like mediumship training, through just like spirits, has been like we are the vessels, and like we are our ancestors, and not just like some kind of, I don't know, sometimes people say it like, oh, they're in your heart. No, but they're like physically in our bodies, like in our bones, in our cells, in our tissues. And their plights are ours. Their traumas are ours. Their struggles are ours. Like, maybe not everyone, like, I don't know how it worked like that, but I know that there are parts of us that need forgiveness that we aren't even conscious of. And like part of an ancestor's work in order to move on might be to do work with us in a specific way. We might have to forgive them. Like, I have an ancestor that came to me that was a monarch. She was a queen, and she actually, in an attempt to negotiate with the colonizer, sold some of her a neighboring tribe's that people, captured them as captured them and sold them into bondage, into slavery. She had all this like guilt and resentment, and like just wanted to like she needs to make it right. She needs to, in order to be her most expansive divine self. And so part of my work was forgiving her, right? And in that, I forgive myself. I forgive the parts of me that have caused harm in this lifetime. And so I just wanted to add that, just as like this idea that like our ancestors are just like, they know all and they are good, like they are us, you know what I'm saying? They are us, and some of them have not made it to where we are all trying to return to, and part of their work is through us.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing that. A lot of times the ancestors that may come to you through your mediumship, through your dreams and all these things, or that you may be getting messages from, they are ancestors who they face an issue in their life that you are somehow facing. Or maybe you're facing it, but from a different angle. And I think it's so important to remember that they are us. Yes. And for me, in certain astral spaces that I was in last year, and this is why I was like, when I saw that Kay had to leave, I was like, I totally get it. I was in an astral war that was started by two white women, but also had two Black men on the e-board, two Black men who I had befriended or who I thought were my friends, right? And so there was, inappropriate things going on. These white women were teaching about decolonization and anti-capitalism, but they didn't know what they were talking about. And I called them in very kindly and was treated very poorly for that. And I was eventually kicked out of the group. After asking for a mediation to be done, after being ignored for like 3 weeks, some other people who were in the group, and I asked for mediation. And about 2 days before they sent the email, we sent the email to them asking for the mediation. I could feel my ancestors being very disappointed because they saw me trying to repeat a mistake they had made. Trying to, why are you begging these white people to listen to you when they've already made it clear that they don't care by ignoring you for this long? Why are you asking for a mediation? Why are you doing this? You know? And I could feel the disappointment, but it wasn't like they were judging me like, oh, you're so stupid for doing this, because they had also done stuff like that. So we all do make mistakes, and a lot of times the ancestors that are walking with us, they can teach us lessons about mistakes, teach us lessons about forgiveness. And depending on how long they've been on the other side, like this was a monarch from a long time ago, so she's been there for a long time now, right? This was centuries ago, right? So she has moved through her spirit and acknowledged the things that she did that was wrong. So it's important for us to be open-minded about that. And also, when you're talking about them literally being in our bodies, in our blood, that is also very true. When I was in undergrad, I wanted to work in international affairs. That's what I thought I was going to do. Work in like the United Nations, World Bank, to help NGOs, help African countries and Caribbean countries not be so dependent on the Western world. But my ancestors, I literally would get sick when I would go to places like this, like the World Bank and stuff like this. I would faint, and doctors could not figure out what was wrong with me. They were like, oh, your blood is healthy. We've done mineral checks. Everything's fine. But I was still very sick. And I realized through spirituality and through speaking with my ancestors, it was because they didn't want me working for those institutions that claim to be helping Africa, but really just still are maintaining neo-colonialism, right? The type of colonialism that took place after our alleged independence from the 60s and the 70s. And that was in 2015 was when it was the roughest, 2015, 2016. And once I realized this and I started taking my ancestral practices more seriously, and I made career shifts into learning about African psychology and indigenous African spirituality, my symptoms went away. And when did they come back? Several years later, last year, 2021, end of my second semester of grad school, when I was trying to fight myself, I was basically trying to fight my destiny, but I didn't realize it by being in grad school and doing assignments that I didn't believe in, and DSM, which is a diagnostic statistical manual, which is what they use to diagnose people. And so this stuff can actually affect your ancestral connection, can actually affect your physical and mental health in those ways, because they're in your body and because they know you're not supposed to be here right now. You're not supposed to be doing this. You're not supposed to be in this type of institution. They will let you know through your body a lot of times, sometimes through your body, sometimes through your thoughts. It's different for different people, but for me, it comes through my physical body a lot, very strongly. So also thank you for raising that. What's in this chat here? My daughter and I don't do spiritual work together because we know our ancestors work differently. Yeah. So if you have different paths, like somebody can be your child, but y'all have a large pool of ancestors that you're connected to, which means there's going to be a lot of different paths and different things being done. I was watching this video, and it's linked in one of the resources that I've shared. So I've shared 3 resources. The first one was an article. It says chant to most honorable ancestors, but it's also more than that, just like basic tips on connecting with them. And then the Spotify episode from Amari Little, one of the speakers who was here earlier, about genealogy and not having to, rely on DNA tests to do them. I've taken DNA tests and I found them helpful. Some people don't. But the fact is that the spiritual technology will often tell you certain things that the test won't. Like, for instance, I found out about my connection to Southern Bantu peoples through dreams and spiritual technology like that, and through studying my mom's language, which is not anywhere easily found online, right? So that Spotify episode is there. And then the third thing on spiritual literacy, it was a full moon thing, but it was mostly about spiritual literacy or whatever. you have to understand like we have to hold space for the vastness of spirit and the differences and the diversities and the complexities of that. In the Spiritual Literacy Full Moon article, there's a lecture by a Native American elder named Tink Tinker. And he was talking about the animal clans that their tribe has, or their nation has. Osage is the name of the group. And his daughter is a buffalo and he's eagle. So because of that, there are certain taboos or there's certain sacred observances that his daughter has to adhere to that's different from him. They're the same bloodline, all right, but energetically they are gravitating towards different parts of that line based off of the spirit guides that they have been assigned for this lifetime. So those things are really important to acknowledge, that you can have your blood family, but you can have different roles in that family. Dr. Patrice N. Douglas does webinars about DSM. Why does that name sound familiar?
Yeah, she's a Black woman that does webinars teaching about, Black folks and DSM. It's
Thank you for sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Oh, you said you don't work from the DSM, you don't do diagnosis. Wow. Yeah, that's so important to hear, because a lot of therapists still stick to those models. And I'm really glad that you've developed your own modality, the ancestral psychotherapy, because the diagnosis system in the DSM is very racist. And like we were saying earlier with the language, there's language in there that's anti-Black, anti-Indigenous, and they just don't have the range. The DSM means Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's basically what the book that mental health professionals use to diagnose people with mental health conditions and disorders. Yes, so that's what it is. And we know that that comes from eugenics. I'm so glad that my professors at Howard taught me the roots of this, that it comes from their medical model, not just for mental health, for anything, biology, mental, psychological, all of it is rooted in eugenics. And the more you deviate from whatever the cishet white cultural Western norm is, the more disordered you are. Denari says, I'm curious about how that works and blends with disability work at Kamara. Do you have anything to share on that, Kamara? Can't get accommodations without documentation.
Yeah, so that part, what I'll do is I'll backtrack a little bit. Like if someone needs it for documentation, I'll do it, but we go over it together. Like, do you think that this is what you want this to say? And I do have a copy of that book, but I'll get out to people and I'll say, this is what that says. I also let them know about, some people want diagnosis for certain things, like for court or for other kinds of things that involve the system. So if you need that from me, I will do it, but it's not the way I operate with my clients. Even if I feel that people have, I always explain to my clients that we all have symptoms, we all have experiences. And when we are in places where we're really stressed out, we can go to a number of places. And all the DSM really is just a group of like white clinicians, doctors. They're really doctors, actually. They're not even people who or therapists who came together and just decided that certain symptoms needed to be called this. It's not rooted in anything that people need to, even if you are if someone says someone's bipolar or schizophrenic, all of that can be managed. And it's all about just recognizing and tracking your own symptoms, feelings, experiences. And, so yeah, I do it for paperwork if someone needs it, but rarely the people I see want that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and also me personally, like I still use the language to get around or to help give people context to things. So I still say, oh, me personally, right? I've been diagnosed in the Western system with ADHD and with bipolar 2. Autism, no, not from the Western perspective, but from the communal perspective or communal groups that have said, oh, you have this and this, right? So I still use the language from it in terms of trying to give people a reference point so people can know that I have this. But I also make sure to clarify to people that Indigenous peoples would not call me bipolar. They would not call me ADHD because we don't work from a deficit model when we're talking about diagnosing or figuring out what is going on with somebody, because there's way too many factors. There's so many more factors than just what is being physically presented. And this is where divination comes in and ancestral work comes in, because you can have 5 people in a room physically presenting the symptoms of depression or physically presenting the symptoms and signs of bipolar, but they may have a different thing causing it at the root. They can have different predispositions. And so they will have an affinity towards certain things for treatment that may differ from the other person, even though they have the same thing, right? On the outward level, because that's all the Western world pays attention to. What is the person physically doing? Okay, they have depression because they're skipping meals and they're sleeping in too much and they don't feel like doing anything and they're in bed all day. But the reason why that could be happening could be different. And so if they just say, oh, they all need this specific type of therapy, or they all need this specific type of medication because they all have depression, without looking at the spiritual factors, without looking at the ancestral factors of what their lineage needs, what their higher self needs, they're oversimplifying a situation and sometimes can make a situation worse. There have been situations that I've seen with people where the diagnosis doesn't really help them because it just makes them a target. And then the therapies are not helpful because what's at the root of the depression, sometimes it's a personal trauma, sometimes it's a systemic issue. Their therapist does not understand that social issue or doesn't understand that problem. So then it's not really helpful. But if you need it for like school or something, there are still ways to get those types of paperwork because we still live in an oppressive society, unfortunately. And until the systems completely collapse, some people will still need those accommodations. However, for autism specifically, I read an article about why it is not good actually to get an official diagnosis for it, because the governments in some states keep log of that. They keep track of stuff like that for people, even though technically it's a violation of privacy. For some reason, somehow they're still getting that. And so if something happens in the future, they can use that as a means to hospitalize you or get you into conservatorships or ban you from doing certain things, because of the ableism and the sanism that because people have these conditions, that automatically means they can't think for themselves or they're going to harm themselves or someone else. The infantilizing that goes on of people who have any mental health condition or disorder, not just autism, So, but it's autism specifically that I read that for some reason, like states are logging the information. So we have to think about the context of when we need the accommodations and what for and how necessary it is at certain times, for protection. So I wanted to name that too. Too many people are overdiagnosed. Yeah, and that's another thing. Like a lot of people are getting diagnosed with things that they don't have. Sometimes a person genuinely may have schizophrenia, or a person generally may have bipolar, genuinely. Because I know for me, as somebody who studied it from the DSM perspective in school, but also has looked at Indigenous understandings of what the Western calls bipolar, I genuinely think I do have. I genuinely think they were correct that I do have this thing. However, sometimes people are just labeled schizophrenic or labeled bipolar because of their anger at a system that is justified, or their fear of a system that is justified. And the diagnosis for schizophrenia changed in the 60s because of Black people in the civil rights movement who were increasingly being, hit with sticks and dogs and all of that, who had become what people would call paranoid, but it was justified. Because if you are constantly under attack in your neighborhood and you see it on the news and nothing's being done, of course you're going to be fearful of a white police officer or even just a regular white man walking down the street. Because it wasn't just police officers doing this, it was just regular white people. So then they kind of use these conditions to change the definitions to make it more suit Black people, especially Black men, the schizophrenia in particular. So we have to understand that from an Indigenous perspective, if we talk about these things, this is about it's about awareness. Bipolar is about awareness. We don't have the word bipolar. I've never seen that word in Indigenous systems, but basically when I tried to understand it for myself and did research from an Indigenous perspective on what it is, it's about heightened awareness. And a lot of people who are healers and readers can have that because it's part of the job. So then the thing that you must do is you develop spiritual tools and a spiritual routine. Sometimes it requires medicine, sometimes it doesn't, depending on the aura and what the person needs. You develop a spiritual routine that can help you be with that energy rather than being taken over by it. The Western world wants you to just suppress the energy, period. It doesn't have anything good to say. Just dead that. The Indigenous perspective is, what is this information saying? Why is it coming out in such a way that is debilitating for the person? And what can we do to help this person be with this energy in a way that's healthy for them, right? And we also have to understand that Indigenous practices are very preventative care, meaning certain things wouldn't have gotten to an extreme level because they would have read the child when the child was a baby and did divination to say like, oh, this child's going to have a predisposition to bipolar or whatever it is. So then they start the treatment at that point. They start the routines and all that when they're a child, so that as they grow and as these things arise in the child and the person as they get older, even if it's challenging, it's not going to get to the point where they're trying to kill themselves or someone else and be hospitalized. Joanne has to go, okay, Joanne, we'll connect later. Thank you. And yeah, we have gone a lot over time, but I'm the type of person, I'm non-linear with time. So if people are still sharing, I'm still talking. I can long-winded, like we said earlier. Kavara said that too. But yeah, the point is that Indigenous medicine is very much about preventative care and holistic care, looking at the spiritual as the foundation for what we do in the physical. So it's not that they don't have a therapy or they don't have a medicine. They have therapies, they have medicines, they have different procedures on how to deal with things, but you have to look at the spiritual to determine what steps are going to be taken for that particular individual and what works for them. And the Western world just kind of plasters everyone as the same. And that's one of the problems. So, yep, that's where we are. It's about finding grounding at the end of the day. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's how I practice, Elmina. I'm so glad
Mm-hmm.
that you're mentioning that, because I feel like I'm being guided in my practice with the things that you're saying right now through my ancestors. Like they're just like, and they're sitting with me while I'm meeting with people. They're like,
Mm-hmm.
that's that, that's that. And so I feel like there's opportunity. I think I was also guided to go to a school that was radically not, they had a different kind of viewpoint than from the, I don't know, I would say like your standard psychology program. So I think that's where I got the opportunity to think a little bit differently. But, I'm in the Bay Area. We have psychology programs that, well, we used to. A lot of them have closed down over the pandemic, but that were a little bit more, I don't know, they weren't 100% radical, but they were a little bit more out the box and looking holistically at mental health. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that, bringing your ancestors to your work, to your sessions. I do that as well when I'm doing readings for people, and I don't really call that therapy per se, because I know people have like preconceived notions of that, but there is an elder, a Black psychology elder, his name is Dr. Thomas Parham, and he said, all healing is therapeutic, but not all therapy is healing. That's basically what he said. And I think that we have to part of the decolonization work is understanding that these harsh lines of what therapy is and what it's not, we kind of have to unlearn that. And we have to also unlearn where we can get therapeutic experiences from. And some people may have, what is his name? His name is Thomas Parham. Let me put it in the chat. He wrote a book about psychology of African Americans. But yeah, we have to be more open to understanding that our ancestors didn't see any one thing as a solution, and that taking care of each other and being therapeutic with one another is something that everybody can do from whatever their level is or from whatever their place is. And so the rigid hierarchy that we see in Western medical models doesn't exist in Indigenous models because everybody's supposed to care for each other. You don't just depend on the diviner, which is what we would equate with like a psychiatrist, right? Or whatever. Your ancestors are helping you, your family's helping you, your friends, your neighbors, your teachers at school. Everybody's supposed to be helping take care of one another. Interdependence, yes. So that is therapy, I think. That is therapeutic. But if you were in a Western, and I know California is more, it just has that reputation for being like more loose with things in general, which is probably why they have more of those programs like Pacifica, Saybrook, all those programs. But I think that sometimes even those can lose grounding of this ancestral element sometimes, and they'll just get into the new age space. So as long as we remember that ancestral element, I think we will be on the right track. Yeah, we can go ahead and wrap up. Does anybody have any last final words they want to share? There are really ancestral programs that they taught me to think outside the box. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I meant they're not ancestral
Oh, they're not.
programs. Sorry, I put the not in there.
But they were like a starting point to help you get to the space to do the ancestral work, right? Okay.
Because I think you need that when you're in these grad school programs, you have to, but I think Black studies in general taught me how to show up in grad school. Like, don't take, you know what I mean? Like, whatever you're doing this for, come from your own worldview. You know what I mean? And sometimes it's really hard, but that was like what I had to maintain my own practice of, no, this is my worldview. Like, this is not like what they're teaching me, but I think I gained some knowledge from there, but I could see where I didn't need to go to grad school at all, but that's another conversation.
No, yeah, I feel like everything that has happened is happening the way it's meant to be. If you already made the decision, you were supposed to go and help the people that you went on your journey. Like I know that I went to undergrad, right? And I know some people who never went to even get an undergrad degree, but I know that what I learned with my undergraduate degree is helping me right now, even in my political science classes, because my political science were like Black politics, you know? So I don't have anything against, and this is just for personal, Kamara already knows this, but I just want to let people know I don't have anything against, I don't have this idea that anybody who has a Western license in mental health is automatically an oppressive person or they shouldn't have gone to school. You go on the path that you need to help the people that you need to, or whoever you're supposed to be helping in a given space or time. And but what I am noticing is like capitalism is collapsing more and more. And so like the younger generation, like Angie also, hers was social work, mine was psychology, it's all mental health. Like it wasn't working. And the more we connect with our ancestors in this time frame that is more recent, as capitalism is falling, the more it's becoming clear to some of us younger ones that this is not the time. It's a hard time to go to school right now. And seeing the failures of these systems, especially as we have economic collapses and how inaccessible they are, even on a basic financial level, right? So yeah, we'll share the IG handles. We wanted, can you put your IG handles, Kamara and Angie? Mine is Mulema Alchemy, and then the handle for the group is at Indigenous Mental Health. He keeps always wanting to correct the word to indigenous, and I put indigenous. And also, when we do send the recording, like I mentioned earlier, we will have it in Mighty Networks, which is a group you can join for free. It's kind of like Facebook groups, but without Facebook. And y'all could also engage with one another there in the thread that will be connected to the recording as well. So yeah, we're gonna close out. I wanna thank the spirits that were with us today, the ancestral spirits, plant spirits, the animal spirits, soul family spirits. This was really engaging, and I'm really grateful that you all decided to register. You all have a great day, okay?
Thank you. Have a good day.
You have a good rest of your weekend, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.
Almina, should I just, I don't know how it's gonna save, but I'm gonna email you with whatever, if it's a link.
Okay.
I don't know how that does it, but I'll stop the recording. I know you're gonna have to like edit it and everything.